Hi, and welcome to A Cry in the Desert. Knowledge apart from God. What is that? Let's read Genesis chapter 3, verses 2 to 5. And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God had said, You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. God had said, Don't eat of the tree of knowledge, because the day you eat of it, you will surely die. But what's so bad about knowledge? I guess that was exactly what Eve must have asked herself when she decided to eat of the fruit, right? Doesn't God want us to have knowledge? Yes, He does, and in abundance. I believe that from the beginning, God's creation was full of wisdom and knowledge. Check it out in my video, Why Did God Create the Lion? I believe that the tree of knowledge represented a knowledge apart from God. Most secular school and university knowledge today is knowledge apart from God. It's assumed and even taught that God does not exist. Man is a product of evolution. In other words, man is God. Man decides what is good and evil. I believe that the knowledge of the tree of knowledge is a knowledge with God out of the equation. Man was created to have fellowship with God and to eat of the tree of life. Without fellowship with God, without eating of the tree of life, man will surely die. For further information on that, watch my video, Why is Satan Evil? Now, God's people, the Israelites, ate manna in the desert for 40 years and died. But Jesus said that he who abides in me, in Jesus, and he who holds on to my words, shall never see death. Jesus is our tree of life. If we have fellowship with him and eat his flesh and drink his blood, we have eternal life. I believe that eating his flesh is reading and doing his word, while drinking his blood is accepting that Jesus died and shed his blood for our sins on the cross. If Jesus is your tree of life, in the center of your spiritual garden, you have eternal life. But if knowledge apart from God is in the midst of your garden, you will surely die. How did man transition from the tree of life to the tree of knowledge? By deception. The woman was deceived. Genesis chapter 3 verse 13. And the Lord said to the woman, What is this you have done? I'm sure God already knew what Eve had done, and the question meant, Why? Why did you do it? What made you leave my life, my fellowship, my wisdom, my knowledge to go and seek a knowledge and a life apart from me? Think about it. What is this you have done? Think of the consequences. So why? The woman said, The serpent deceived me and I ate. The serpent deceived me. Eve would never have chosen a life apart from God without a deception. Eve had probably never seen a deception before. She didn't recognize that she was being deceived. Lucifer, the serpent, has not changed. He's doing everything he can to deceive people into believing in knowledge apart from God. And Lucifer is very successful in doing that because people don't realize that they are being deceived. And they don't recognize that they are being deceived. Evolution theory combined with modern astronomy and astrophysics prove without a doubt that there was a Big Bang 14 million years ago, or 14 billion years ago, and that man was formed by stardust. We live on a planet revolving around a star in the Milky Way, in a galaxy among trillions of galaxies in an indefinite expanding universe, which is just a parallel to an infinite number of universes. In other words, man is totally insignificant. There is no God. The knowledge that God created the earth is false. Man's knowledge is the only God there is. Man is God. The serpent deceived me. The word deceived is in Hebrew, nasa. And isn't it strange that the word nasa is in the NASA logo is spoken by the serpent's tongue? And no, as I mentioned before, nothing in the logo is there by coincidence. I know, cognitive dissonance. Let me tell you the truth. An aircraft looked like this, but a snake's tongue looked exactly like this. NASA, the space agency, is the world's most expensive disinformation agency. Its primary function is to exalt knowledge apart from God. By using the knowledge of astronomy and space travel, NASA deceives the world into believing that there is no God and that man can become God. Its secondary purpose is to make money through the development of weapon technology, aircraft and spacecraft. The management of NASA and everyone in a top position in NASA, including the astronauts, are Illuminati and or high-ranking Freemasons. Last time I was in Houston, I went to see NASA and I learned that NASA has around 17,000 employees in all of their departments around the world. 99.9% of these people have no clue about NASA's hidden agenda of hiding God and manipulating the world's general population. NASA was established in 1958 and officially NASA stands for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The President of the US appoints NASA's top executives. A significant contributor to NASA's space program was the technology from Hitler's German rocket program led by the Nazi rocket scientist Wernher von Braun. Wernher von Braun was recruited during Operation Paperclip by the US government agency AMBA, the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. Wernher von Braun became a close friend of another important contributor to NASA's deception program, the 33rd degree Freemason Walt Disney, and the film producer Stanley Kubrick. Wernher von Braun, Walt Disney and Stanley Kubrick were some of the main components behind NASA's deceptive mass media propaganda program. Wernher von Braun is known for his work as a registered Nazi at a concentration camp under Adolf Hitler and for his development of spacecraft rockets. After the war, Wernher von Braun established a close friendship with Walt Disney. But what has Walt Disney to do with spacecraft technology, you may ask? Let's begin with a bit of history. Wernher von Braun was born in Germany in 1912. He was a poor high school student, especially in math and physics, but that changed when he read a fiction book about a rocket in space by an early rocket scientist pioneer, Hermann Oberth. After Germany lost World War I, the Treaty of Versailles was established. That treaty was developed especially to prevent Germany from developing weapons of war, but it did not include rockets. Inspired by Hermann Oberth, Wernher von Braun became the world's leading rocket scientist working on Germany's rocket program, and Hitler employed him to develop a rocket which could be used as a weapon. Von Braun developed the German V2 rocket, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. The rockets were built by concentration slave laborers in the Nazi Nordhausen-Dora concentration camp, directly overseen by Wernher von Braun. Von Braun denied that he was a Nazi after the war. But historical records tell another story. Besides missile production, von Braun had a dream: human space travel. After World War II ended, the Nazi Party was unwilling to surrender von Braun due to his highly classified knowledge about rocketry. Wernher von Braun was hot cake, and he was hidden in the Swiss Alps guarded by SS officers, who were ordered to kill anyone who attempted to capture Wernher von Braun. The SS officers and von Braun were hiding in different nearby villages in the Alps, but von Braun managed to escape to Austria, where he surrendered himself to the US Army and was allowed exile in the United States. Von Braun immediately started working with the American government. But because of his Nazi background, that created a great deal of controversy. But in 1952, Walt Disney came to his rescue. He became a friend of Werner von Braun, and through a massive film propaganda program, Walt Disney convinced the world about the necessity to build rockets for space travel. Together they created 3 television programs: Man in Space, Man on the Moon, and Mars and Beyond. Von Braun appeared in these episodes, explaining how human space travel was actually possible.
Before our plans can fully materialize. However, let us imagine for a moment that the many problems have been solved and that after completing our space station, we are ready to begin our first voyage around the moon.
There were more than 42 million viewers of the television programs, which was a lot of people at that time. And that really kickstarted the governmental support of the NASA and NASA's moon program, which was overseen by Werner von Braun. To this day, NASA's space program is a pile of deception. They never went above a low orbit, and the pictures taken from Earth from space and the moon have all been proven to be fake CGI images. The pictures taken of Earth from the moon were fake.
Okay. All right. Do you see Photoshop?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And if those of you think this technical difficulty was planned and think I'm scamming you, go do it for yourself. Because you're going to find the exact same thing. I got nothing to hide here. This is live on the air, okay? I'm going to zoom in on the Earth in Photoshop. Can you see the Earth?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to go to Image, Adjust, Levels, and I'm going to bring the levels over here. And I'm going to bring the levels up. Uh-oh. What is that?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, wow. Why is there a square box around the Earth allegedly taken from the scientists on the moon in Apollo 17? Then you got other pictures like this, the blue marble, right, that come out. Okay, well, there's a big problem with the blue marble, and I'm going to zoom in here and show you what the problem is. These are all composite images where they are really not very good at Photoshop because they're using the Photoshop clone tool to replicate clouds. This cloud is a copy of this cloud. See the formations? They're identical formations side by side. Here are other blue marbles, okay, allegedly done by NASA. And if you don't believe me, here's the space.com website where I got the picture. Here's the nasa.gov website where I got this picture. Okay, they can't even get the scale right. Look how big the United States is in this one versus this one. Colors all off. I mean, so far all of these are crap.
The pictures allegedly taken of Earth from space were all fake. This map of the world is called Peter's projection map, which is a map showing the real sizes and position of the world's countries based on real distances. Compare that to the alleged pictures of Earth taken from space. Hello? The CGI animators can't even agree on the sizes and positions of the countries, and the clouds are obviously CGI too. This was allegedly taken by the Galileo space probe. The CGI animators didn't even bother to change the clouds during the 24-hour rotation of the globe. This video shows Neil Armstrong in low orbit faking a picture of the Earth while transmitting to the world on TV that he is millions of miles away.
An old reel received by mistake. It contains the raw or unedited footage of the crew of Apollo 11, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin Jr. and Neil Armstrong, staging part of their mission for nearly an hour in living color, with exceptionally clear behind-the-scenes audio of conversations discussing the techniques used to achieve a disingenuous picture depicting the Earth at a distance. in order to falsely demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. It cannot be misconstrued that this staging was done for some other reason prior to the mission, for the reel itself is slated and dated July 18th, 19th and 20th, 1969, the very days of the mission when they were said to be approaching and achieving lunar orbit. Furthermore, it is apparent they are in genuine zero gravity aboard the actual spacecraft, necessary to convince the mass media of their authenticity, just not any further than Earth orbit, as you will see. In this never-before-seen or heard footage, not only is the radio conversation between the astronauts and Houston Control audible, there is a secondary, private conversation taking place between the crew and a third confidential party, prompting the astronauts with what to say, when to speak, and how to effectively manipulate the camera to achieve the desired misleading effect. NASA claims that the Houston transmissions were the only ones taking place with the astronauts. Listen now as Houston Control initiates a conversation with the crew, only to find them too preoccupied with the behind-the-scenes trickery to respond. Moments pass and the oversight is picked up on by the clandestine third party, who quickly prompts them with talk. Immediately, Neil Armstrong speaks.
Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over. Okay, Roger. We're coming in on Earth.
Again, the illusion they are attempting to create is the Earth at a distance to demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. Understand, too, that only about 20 seconds of this raw footage was ever broadcast to the public, and these conversations discussing their deception were believed to be private, until now. Here they discuss that these television transmissions were in fact not broadcast live as everyone believed. They were first screened and edited for playback later.
Roger, Neil. We just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get the playback, we can sort of correlate what we're seeing. Thank you very much.
Here they discuss the fact that they have turned out the lights and have blocked out sunlight from entering the spacecraft through the other windows, as to not cause any reflected light to fall onto the spacecraft's wall in the foreground.
Okay, very good. Well, we shut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window, and there isn't any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter would not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit. The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from entering through the other windows. Here you can see the extruded window, probably 2 inches thick at the bottom. This is because the Earth's shine is coming in at a downward angle. It also causes the Earth to appear to be an irregularly shaped circle, for you are seeing the outside of the window at the bottom and the inside of the window at the top, which together form 2 different sized halves of a circle. Subsequently, this take was never used. As they perfected the shot, a crescent-shaped piece of black material was inset slightly into the window to create the illusion of the Earth's terminator line dividing night and day. It is uncannily convincing. During this segment, intended to be edited and played back later for the worldwide television audience, dated July 18, 1969, Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date. when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue cast, see white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth. And you see
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window. Here is the slate for the 19th of July, and the same shot of trickery on the 19th of July, and then the 20th, and the same misleading shot on the 20th. Later that evening, they were said to be walking on the moon. How can this be when they were in Earth orbit only 9 hours earlier, and the moon is some 3 days' journey away? Furthermore, if they genuinely went to the moon, why would they be faking any part of it? Why this trickery with the window? By faking being halfway to the moon, it becomes apparent that they did so because they could not even go halfway.
The alleged space stations are fraud. The alleged space transmissions are filmed from a studio on Earth.
This is one of those occasions where we can't really trust two-dimensional media, because all we have is images and video that supposedly prove that there's an International Space Station up there and it's been manned since 1999. One of the most visible indications that there are people up in space inside the International Space Station is that they're in zero gravity. However, NASA has an aircraft known as the Vomit Comet, and when this aircraft takes a certain flight path, the people inside feel weightlessness. So it's almost certain that NASA has an aircraft fitted out to look like the International Space Station's interior. Now take a look at this.
Hello, Katie.
Notice how suddenly, as she starts to wave, she floats out of control.
This is so cool, isn't it? Hey, Katie, I want to
Welcome
ask you
aboard
a
the
question.
space station.
This is Leah. Look at this. Wow.
The same thing happens here. As the plane starts its zero-G dive, the people start to spontaneously float upwards. The other problem with this technique is that this aircraft can only simulate zero gravity in 45-second to a minute bursts. So NASA employs many little tricks here to simulate weightlessness. None of their footage is live, it's all pre-recorded and edited, so Plenty of scope there to use some of the cinematic tricks that we're used to, like harnesses and wires that are edited out later with CGI. But here we can see one of the tricks they use to maintain continuity between periods of weightlessness. Take a look at this woman's hair. Doesn't it look a bit strange to you? Look how it seems to spring back into place. We're led to believe that this is an effect of weightlessness, that the hair will just sort of float around. But it doesn't quite seem natural, does it? Here's video from the Vomit Comet again. Watch the way this woman's hair flows as she moves. Seems quite obvious now that this is some kind of perm or hairspray, so that between periods of weightlessness we get that visual continuity. Now, there are plenty of examples of these gravitational anomalies, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I just wanted to show that all these things that you can see from NASA can be simulated and CGI'd up for your benefit. They don't seem to do any real scientific experiments up there. The effort seems to be just to get you to believe that they're there. That's it. There are also plenty of anomalies when you look at spacewalks. For footage of spacewalks on the exterior of the International Space Station, NASA will freely admit they have a huge swimming pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, where they train their astronauts. And within this huge swimming pool, they have a mock-up of the exterior of the International Space Station. I'm going to show you a video from a YouTuber called Jungle Surfer, who's done the best expose of spacewalking anomalies.
Another aspect of the illusion of space travel is spacewalks. These are faked inside a swimming pool. It's a custom-built swimming pool, and that's a great way to fake zero gravity. About 6 months ago, in 2013, a gallon of water leaked into one of their spacesuits in a matter of seconds. NASA doesn't really have a proper explanation for how on earth this could have happened. There shouldn't be water leaking into someone's helmet and a person almost drowning in space. How can you drown in space? They now wear snorkels to make sure that they don't drown in space. How can this be happening? A snorkel in space? There could be some water in the porous plate sublimator. When they were on the moon, they supposedly had about a gallon of water, but that cooling system is supposed to be well away from their head. There really is no sane explanation for why a gallon of water would leak into someone's spacesuit, unless you realize the whole thing is faked inside a swimming pool. In this scene, you can see the Chinese spacewalk, and you can see a bubble coming up from the guy's suit. How do you have a bubble in space? Space is supposed to be a vacuum, not a swimming pool. But it's obviously just a swimming pool filled with water. Obviously, there would be some equipment that they could only fix from the outside, but a lot of these spacewalks, it seems like equipment they easily could have configured to be accessible from the inside of the International Space Station. It seems more like an excuse to get out and show their other space trick, which is the faking of spacewalks in a swimming pool. In this vid, you catch a glimpse of someone wearing a scuba tank. Scuba tanks in space? Snorkels and scuba tanks in space? They act like a spacewalk is just a walk in the park, like there's very little danger involved at all. They're looking through the spacesuits. Oh, here's a spacesuit, we're going to go for a spacewalk. As if there's no danger at all, like they don't care. They don't care. They don't act like they're in a life-threatening situation, like they could die at any second, even though they can. So you would think to preserve their life, they would want to minimize the amount of spacewalking that they did. But there seems to be an abundance of equipment on the outside of the International Space Station that constantly requires repairing, which makes for a good TV spectacle and is inspired by movies like Sandra Bullock's Gravity. And after Gravity came out, they of course had to do another spacewalk to fix some emergency some piece of equipment that their lives depend on that, amazingly, they can fix every time. But you know what? Thanks to the genius of the engineers at NASA, they employ snorkels in space now, so that should stop them from drowning.
Finally, I'm going to leave the last word to one of the astronauts themselves, when he made a tiny little slip-up during a question and answer session. Take note of his body language after he makes his mistake.
Hello, my name is Bailey. This question is for Chris. What was high school like for you?
Well, it was the 1980s, so the music was different, the hairstyle was different, the clothes we wore were different than today, but probably in 5 or 10 years it'll be the same. And in school, I was just like you, probably all of you there. I tried my best. I didn't always succeed, didn't always do well, but I put my best effort into school. Math and science were kind of my favorite subject. I didn't really like English and reading too much, but I've since grown out of that, and I enjoy reading now. And I played a lot of sports. And all of that happened in a little town called York, Maine, across the United States from where we're talking to you right now.
Whoops.
Called York, Maine, across the United States from where we're talking to you right now.
Now, the million-dollar question. Why are they deliberately fooling the general population? What is the purpose? What is the agenda? It all boils down to hiding the Earth's geocentricity. If the Earth is heliocentric, revolving around the Sun, the Earth is just an insignificant dot in the universe. In other words, God didn't create the Earth. He didn't create you and me. However, if the Earth is geocentric, the geocentric center of the universe, then there's no doubt that God is real and that God created the heaven and the earth as written in the Bible. Let's read some verses from Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, 6 to 7, 13 and 16 to 17. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Notice that God created the earth first, and on the second day the firmament. Then God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Thus God made the firmament. So the evening and the morning were the third day. Then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. According to Genesis, God created the earth first, then the firmament, and then the sun, moon, and the stars, which God set in the firmament to give light on the earth. According to NASA's heliocentric view, the galaxy containing the Earth is moving at enormous speed in the universe, and the Milky Way in the galaxy is moving around the galaxy while the Earth is revolving around the Sun. God created the Earth first, and consequently the Earth was not revolving around anything, right? The Earth is the center. It doesn't move. On the third day, God set the lights in the firmament to give light on the Earth. He didn't create the Earth revolving around a star. That is a lie, going 400 years back to the sun god worshipper Copernicus. Psalm 104 verse 5. You who laid the foundations of the earth, so it should not be moved forever. If you watch the documentary movie The Principle, you will see that many of the world's top scientists and astrophysicists have proved by mapping the cosmic radiation that the center of radiation is the Earth. That means that the Earth was created first. Many of these scientists don't believe in God, but they have realized that the heliocentric universe is not true. Copernicus' principle is wrong. Copernicus was in a cult worshipping the sun, and consequently Copernicus falsely assumed that the Earth was revolving around the sun. Through science-based knowledge apart from God's knowledge, Copernicus managed to create a false knowledge which has survived to this day. I know this raises a lot of cognitive dissonance, because this is different from what you were told in the school and by NASA, right? This is religious fanaticism at its peak, right? I've been there myself, so I know what you are thinking. But as unbelievable as this may appear to you, the Earth does not move. No serious science experiments has ever been able to detect and prove that the Earth is moving. Quite on the contrary.
On its orbit around the Sun, the Earth travels at 30 kilometers per second through the ether. In 1887, Michelson and Morley carried out an experiment to check this speed of the Earth through the ether. They passed light through two long arms, one in the direction of the Earth's travel and the other at right angles to it. The light traveling in the direction of the Earth's travel should have taken longer to return than that traveling at right angles to the Earth's direction of travel. To the amazement of the scientific world, no such speed as 30 kilometers per second was detected. The Michelson-Morley experiment is the only one of 4 experiments that is well known. The other 3 experiments never taught are: 1. The Michelson-Gale experiment that showed that the ether was passing across the surface of the Earth once every 24 hours. 2. Airy's failure experiment proved that it was the moving starlight carried by the rotating ether that was passing across the stationary Earth. 3. The Sagnac experiment that proved there was an ether, thus demolishing relativity theory. I have made separate videos giving more detailed explanations of the last 2. Let us examine briefly these 3 experiments. The Michelson-Gale experiment used sealed tubes covering a large area that measured the speed of the ether relative to the surface of the Earth. They obtained a value that was within 2% of the known speed of about 0.45 kilometers per second at the equator. But this speed could have been due either to the Earth spinning in a stationary ether or the passing of the rotating ether around a stationary Earth. It was Airy's failure experiment that proved it was the moving ether passing across a stationary Earth. If the Earth was stationary and the stars were stationary, the starlight would come straight into the telescope. However, if the telescope is moving at, say, 5 miles an hour, you would then have to tip the telescope, let us say, 5 degrees to see the star. However, if the starlight is being carried across the surface of a stationary telescope at 5 miles an hour, you would still have to tip the telescope at 5 degrees to see it. So you cannot tell which one is stationary. To see whether it is the telescope or the stars that are moving, all you have to do is to fill the telescope with water, which greatly slows down the light when it is in the telescope. If it is the telescope that is moving, then you have to tip the telescope a little further because of the slower speed of the light in the telescope. However, if it is the stars that are moving past the stationary telescope, then the telescope does not have to be tipped any further because the starlight is coming in at the correct angle anyway. That Airy failed to find any further tipping was needed proved that it was the telescope and therefore the Earth that was stationary. This important conclusion was not even mentioned in his report. It was too explosive. Sagnac split a beam of light and sent the 2 beams in opposite directions around a path, recombined the beams and noted their interference fringes. The whole system was on a turntable, and he then turned it at 2 revolutions per second, remeasured the fringes and found that they had changed. This was due to the movement of the mirrors, made the path for one beam longer and the other shorter. This proved that the ether existed, because once the light left the source, its speed was controlled by the comparatively stationary ether in the laboratory. This demolished Einstein's relativity theory, which had abolished the ether. So, from these 4 experiments, it is obvious that the Earth is at the center of the universe, and the Sun, planets, moons, and stars are all being swept around the stationary Earth. This is the only explanation that satisfies the most obvious results of all these 4 experiments. No wonder the universities distort the Michelson-Morley experiment and do not teach the other 3 hidden experiments.
According to the Bible, the sun, moon, and stars are moving, showing us earthlings, the seasons. The earth is not moving. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 5. The sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. Psalm 19 verse 1 and verses 4 to 6. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. In them he has set a tabernacle for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoices like a strong man to run its race. Its rising is from one end of heaven, and its circuit to the other end, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. This verse confirms Genesis chapter 1 about the sun in the firmament. Notice that the sun is running its race, rising from one end of heaven in a circuit to the other end. The Bible and NASA cannot be right at the same time. Someone is not telling the truth, right? The Bible is clear when it states that the sun, moon, and stars move in the firmament relative to the earth. Joshua chapter 10 verse 13. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Joshua? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And Isaiah chapter 38 verse 8. Behold, I will bring the shadow of the sundial which has gone down with the sun on the sundial of Ahaz 10 degrees backward. So the sun returned 10 degrees on the dial by which it had gone down. These are just a few Bible verses. There are many other Bible verses claiming the sun, moon, and stars are moving in the firmament above the earth. But that's not what you have been told in school, right? No, you have been lied to. I'm not telling you that NASA is not doing any real science at all. No, they are making a lot of technological developments in astronomy, aviation, and technology, and weapon technology. But at the same time, they are lying to the general population by showing that there is no God. They are feeding the world the tree of knowledge, and knowledge apart from God. I've collected thousands of NASA lies, and I could expose NASA lies all day long if I wanted to, for days. Time will not allow that I go into that, but I'll urge you to do your own unbiased research. Let me finish this video off by showing you a few NASA lies.
Don't be ridiculous, Dave. You couldn't fake something like that. There'll be too many people involved, and the truth is bound to get out. Blam, 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 blam. The best example of space shuttle fakery is the Challenger disaster. In 1986, the shuttle Challenger exploded about 74 seconds after takeoff, killing all 7 astronauts inside. Or did it? It turns out that 6 of the 7 are still alive and kicking today. Ellison Onizuka claims to be his identical twin brother, Claude. Yeah, I've got an identical twin brother, Claude, too. The Challenger pilot, Mickey Smith, hasn't even bothered changing his name. He's now Professor Michael J. Smith of University of Wisconsin. Now, Krista McAuliffe was a bit of a sneaky one. She was the Challenger payload specialist, quite famous for being a teacher. It turns out during her astronaut days she was using her middle name, Krista. And now she goes by her first name, Sharon. And she's a Syracuse law professor. The Challenger commander, Francis Richard Scobie, is now Dick Scobie, which sounds like a rather unpleasant disease, CEO of Cows in Trees Limited. Judith Resnick, the Challenger mission specialist, again hasn't even bothered changing her name. She's a professor at Yale Law. And finally, Ronald McNair, another Challenger mission specialist, claims to be his identical twin brother, Carl McNair. What are the odds?
The Apollo 17 astronaut Gene Cernan described in his book how the design of the gloves in his spacesuit caused a serious damage to his fingernails whilst walking on the moon. Here you can see Gene Cernan's damaged fingernails while cutting a cake. However, here's Gene Cernan just after he landed on the water coming out of the space capsule. And let's zoom in on his hand.
And here's an example of a schoolboy mistake. This is a famous picture from Apollo 8, which is entitled Earthrise. It was taken from above the moon's surface, looking back at the Earth. The only problem is, the Earth appears the same size as the moon appears from the Earth. But the Earth is 4 times the size of the moon. So it should have looked like this. Somebody screwed up. Now, there will be some people who still think we went to the moon. I can't believe that there are still people who think that 1969 technology went over 400,000 miles, managed to navigate to the moon using computers that were orders of magnitude less powerful than the first iPhone, passing through the immensely hazardous Van Allen radiation belts, which, by the way, NASA cannot figure out how to get through today, somehow landed on the moon, spent a delightful few days planting flags, playing golf, riding around on dune buggies, and then took off, or rather levitated off the lunar surface, only briefly nipping back to pick up the person operating the camera, and returned safely. And not just once, but 7 times. It's a fantasy. The whole thing is a fantasy. Everything you saw supposedly on the moon was in a soundstage using Stanley Kubrick's perfected front projection technology. And I'm not going to spend much time. There's plenty of evidence to show that it was completely faked. It was complete fantasy.
NASA has named their missions after the sun god Apollo and the planets and stars after pagan gods. And at the same time, they have banned the name of Jesus. Here's an alleged NASA picture of Pluto, another pagan god name. Walt Disney's dog Pluto can be found in this NASA picture of the planet Pluto. Hello! Here's a picture of the Earth with the clouds spelling the word sex. The Luciferian elite running NASA is not only deceiving, but mocking the disgusting general population. They are laughing at you. You are being deceived.